So Papaji had, I think in his own mind at least, abandoned his family. He was staying at Ramanashram in, I think, July 1947, just before independence. I've already told this story, but I elaborate on it a little bit. Papaji said I wasn't in contact with my family, I wasn't reading the newspapers, I was completely unaware of any political development inside India. That was one thing I want to say. Papaji said I was addicted to Ramana Maharishi's form. He said I was so in love with my guru, I took every opportunity to be in his presence. He said I wanted nothing from him except to look at his form, to be aware of his form. That was my whole life was organized, getting an opportunity to stare at Bhagavan. And one little story which I love, he said at 12 till 2, which was his official resting time, devotees weren't allowed inside the hall, but Papaji said I found a particular vantage point where I could see sideways through a window, not at Bhagavan, but he said if Bhagavan ever stretched a leg or stuck an elbow out, he said I could get one glimpse of an elbow or maybe one glimpse of a big toe, and he said that was enough for me. I could sit there for 2 hours staring at this window, and if I saw his big toe once or his elbow once, that would make my day. I was absolutely enraptured by the form. I was in love with Bhagavan, I was in love with his form. And one other interesting thing before I move on, he said in that state, when I knew myself to be self and I knew Bhagavan to be that same self, he said you can see very, very clearly who is and who is not enlightened if you're in this state. He said I used to look at Bhagavan's eyes and they would be unwavering, unblinking, staring out into space. He said I would look at those eyes absolutely intently, hour upon hour upon hour, and he said I never saw a single trace of a thought or a desire in those eyes. He said I've never seen any other face like this in my entire life. I've been with great saints, I've been all over the world. He said I've never seen someone who was as totally thought-free and desire-free as Bhagavan, and I saw that by looking at that man's eyes. And then he said as advice, he said my advice to everyone is to find somebody like this, someone who has absolutely no thought, no desire, to go into their presence, to look at those eyes, to be aware of those eyes. And those eyes, if you yourself can subjugate your own desires and look at those eyes of the Guru will put you into that same state of desirelessness. That was just an aside. So Papaji is saying, I was absolutely enraptured by Bhagavan's form. I didn't want to see anything else, I didn't want to be anywhere else, I wasn't in contact with my family. And then Devaraji Mudalia, who was the compiler of Day by Day, read in the paper that a boundary had been established in the Punjab, which meant that Papaji's family would be on the wrong side of the border. So because he knew Papaji wasn't reading the paper, he said, where is your family? And he said, Lyalpur. And Devaraji Mudalia said, they're on the wrong side of the border, there's going to be a lot of violence up there, you should go, look after your family, make sure they get out. And he said, no, my home is here, I'm in love with Bhagavan, I'm far too attached to his form to go anywhere else. So Devaraji Mudalia kind of went behind his back and told Bhagavan that Punja, he was called Mr. Punja's family, is going to be marooned in Lyalpur. I think Mr. Punja should go back and get them out. So that's when this meeting took place on the hill. Bhagavan said, you must go and take care of your family. Papaji said, it's all a dream, I have no family. Bhagavan said, don't be afraid of the dream, go and do your duty. So Papaji left, went up to, I think it would have been Amritsar, the station in Amritsar, and he had heard that there had been massacres on either side of the border. The Hindus were massacring the Muslims were attacking the Hindus, lots of people were being killed on these cross-border train trips. He said, I went to get in my carriage, and he said, suddenly I heard the voice of my guru saying, don't sit with the Hindus, go and sit with the Muslims. He said it wasn't a physical voice like coming down from the sky. Something inside me that I knew was my guru said, go and sit with the Muslims. So he said, I went and sat in the Muslim compartment. He said the train was stopped, and he said all the Hindus on the train were attacked, many of them were murdered, and I sat in this one carriage with the Muslims, and I was safe. And he had a big Om tattooed on his hand, and he said I was very surreptitiously trying to pull my shirt sleeve down to cover up the Om, because if the Muslims had seen it, I would have been next for the massacre. He got back to Lyallpur, collected, he said, 35 members of his family, and he brought them back on the last train that was leaving India. He said, as I looked behind the train, I could already see the mobs were breaking up the railway line, pulling up the lines. He said it was like a scene from a movie. We were escaping along a railway line that was actually being pulled up behind the train. Now he said, I had a friend in the army who had gone to settle in Lucknow. That was the only place I knew. So we all went, 35 of us, we descended on this man, we all camped in his house. Because these refugees were mostly women and I was the only one who could go out and work, I had to go out and work and support all these people, which he did for the better part of 3 years. So right through till 1950, he took his obligation to look after his family very seriously. He worked round the clock and supplied enough food until they got a house of their own. One by one, the more distant relatives were sent off to other towns where they settled and got jobs. But he was the family patriarch. He was in charge. He organized the whole migration. He organized the resettlement of all these people. Then he heard on the radio that Bhagavan had died, and he actually saw this light in the sky that many people saw, and knew that this was his guru passing away. He never had a chance to go back, but he said, inside, Bhagavan had told me, I am with you wherever you are. On their last meeting, he said, I knew that I didn't leave Bhagavan on the slopes of Arunachala, that who Bhagavan really is was who I really was, and that Bhagavan was inside me as my own self. He said, I missed the form because I was addicted to it, but I knew that I could never go anywhere away from Bhagavan, that Bhagavan was my own self, my own heart, I could never be separate from it. Now, around 1950, he'd got most of his family fairly well settled in various jobs. He thought that they could all manage by themselves, and he had this inner feeling that he should go back to Tiruvannamalai. He said, I just wanted to go and be there, be by myself, live a sadhu-y existence, and just be where my master had lived his life. So he came back to Tiruvannamalai, spent a few months being quiet, being peaceful, met a few of the old devotees, and then he, remember this right, somebody asked him about his family, and he said, oh, I'm not looking after them, I'm not sending them any money. And this man thought this wasn't correct, that he should be supporting his family. So he secretly arranged to send money to Papaji's family in Lucknow, and somehow he also arranged for Papaji to get a job in Bangalore. Papaji said, I went to Bangalore to meet devotees. I met this man there, and although it was never my intention to get a job, keep a job, I suddenly found myself working for a mining company, and the man who had hired me had found out I wasn't supporting my family, so he secretly started sending money to my family in Lucknow, and suddenly I was on the payroll of a mining company in Karnataka. So from about 1951 to 1966, he was working very hard again, supervising the surface operations of various mining operations in Karnataka and Goa. So he said, my job was to lay down infrastructure, roads through the forest, build houses for the workers, arrange accommodation, food, to collect all the ore that was dug out, to take it off to the port, usually Mangalore on the west coast, put it on the ship and ship it off to whatever destination it was going to. He said, I worked very hard, did my job very well. And then he said around the mid-1960s, when I was about 55 years old, I thought, that's it. My children don't need me anymore. Finally I can retire. He said, in India, 55 is a respectable retirement age. Lots of people give up. So he said, I found myself on the west coast of India, and as often happens, he said, in my life, people started coming. I had a little centre there. I started teaching. But he always lived a very peripatetic life. He said, I never wanted a big group of people around. I liked my freedom to travel. I liked to be unknown. So from 1966 onwards, he would spend a large part of the year just travelling around India, meeting people, having little satsangs. He never had a schedule. This was his trick to avoid people following him. He would never tell people where he was going. He would just arrive in your town, knock on your door and say, hi, I'm here for a week. And then at the end of the week he would go somewhere else, and he'd never tell you where he was going next. You could take him to the bus stand or the train station. He'd get on a train or a bus, but he wouldn't tell you where he was getting off. So for a long time he lived a life of occasional meetings with devotees, periods with his family in Lucknow, and always long periods in the Himalayas. He absolutely loved the Ganga. He loved walking along the Ganga. He loved walking in the foothills of the Himalayas. So he gave himself several months a year when he would just roam the Himalayas. He would give himself family time in Lucknow, and for the rest of the year he would flit from town to town all over India, meeting people who wanted to have satsang with him.